Welcome everyone. I'm Michele Gold, Board Chair at Holocaust Museum LA. Thank you all for joining us today to commemorate the 82nd anniversary of the first Kindertransport that left from Berlin on December 1st, 1938, arriving in Harwich, Great Britain on December 2nd of 1938, with approximately 200 children, most of whom were from a Jewish orphanage that had been destroyed in the Kristallnacht pogrom. Between December 1st, 1938 to September 1st of 1939, approximately 10,000 children were rescued by means of the Kindertransport, mostly from Berlin, Vienna, Prague, and other major cities in Central Europe, and they were given safe passage to Great Britain. Some of the children stayed in hostels. Most of the younger ones were sent to live with foster families. Only a few children had prearranged sponsors waiting for them. No child or children were accompanied by their parents. A few babies were carried by older children. My mother was from Leipzig, Germany. She was one of the 10,000 rescued children, and I often share her story. It's about a young girl who, in spite of the trauma of being separated from her family and her ultimate pain of loss, was the wisest person I ever knew, and always so grateful for having been given a chance of a good life, which she lived with dignity and with kindness. We are so privileged to have joining us for today's discussion, Kindertransport survivor and treasured member of our museum community, Paul Kester. And we are so thrilled that Barbara Winton is joining us today. Barbara is the daughter of rescuer Sir Nicholas Winton, who arranged safe passage for 669 endangered children to safety from the Nazi threat. The children he saved famously became known as the Winton children. His actions were something the world should always remember. Before you hear from our esteemed guests, let me first tell you a little bit about the museum. Holocaust Museum LA is the first Holocaust museum in the United States. Founded in 1961 by survivors who wanted to create a safe place to display their precious artifacts in perpetuity and to remember their family members and loved ones who had perished. Today, the museum continues to provide free Holocaust education to students and visitors from across Los Angeles, the United States, and the world, fulfilling the mission of our founding survivors to commemorate, to educate, and to inspire. Holocaust Museum LA brings you programs like today's at no charge. If you are enjoying our programs, we ask that you consider supporting our work by going to holocaustmuseumla.org to make a donation. We will have time at the end of Paul and Barbara's presentation for questions. So if you do have a question, please type them into the Q&A box. If you are a Kindertransport survivor or a second or third generation Kindertransport survivor, please would you type your name in the Q&A box so we will be able to recognize you by name after the presentation. And now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Kindertransport survivor Paul Kester. Paul's journey to freedom was via Sweden. Sweden took in a small quota of approximately 500 children, and Paul is one of the 500 children. Paul, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Michele. When we talk about the Holocaust, we talk about 6 million Jews being murdered, having been murdered. What we don't emphasize often enough is that among the 6 million, there were 1.5 million children. I was not one of them. I was lucky, thanks to the Kindertransport program. Let me tell you how it all came about. I was born in Wiesbaden, a town in West Germany. I had a 2-year older sister. I had a happy childhood. I was 7 years old when Hitler came to power. But during the early years, we as children were not impacted as much by the new regime, by its ideology of racism, by its vibrant and state-sponsored anti-Semitism. And I had a relatively normal childhood. Yes, there was talk about emigration, but for a family with children and parents, grandparents, to just pack up and leave Germany, where we had been assimilated and where our family history goes back hundreds of years, to go to a foreign country where you were not wanted, where your business or profession were not usable. That was a decision that was not easily made. In my family, a couple of young cousins in their early 20s did leave when they were kicked out of university and immigrated at that time to what was then Palestine. Others went to England or United States, but for us to break up, for my family, and just pack up and go, it was just a decision not easily contemplated or made. As the years progressed, from 1933 to 1938, it became more clear that eventually emigration had to be undertaken. Through a relative in New York who was willing to sponsor one of the children in the family, my sister, who was 2 years older, in the summer of 1938, left for New York. She was 14 years old. I would have liked to leave too, but where to? My life continued relatively normal. I still went to a German gymnasium, a high school, where I started at the age of 10 in 1936. And whereas I was together with my best friend by the name of Leo, we were the only 2 Jewish kids in class, and we managed to get along. Socially, of course, there was a distinction. The other kids belonged to the Hitler Youth. Our social life centered on the small Jewish community and what they had to offer in terms of social activities for children, plus the Jewish sports club where I was quite active. Nothing much happened until one day, it was the 10th of November, 1938, that an administrator at school came to our class mid-morning and said, "You 2 Jewish boys better go home, there's trouble." Well, it was Crystal Night, the destruction of synagogues, the smashing of stores, the beginning of the end for Jews in Europe. I came home. My mother and grandmother who lived with us were upset. They had tried to go to our clothing store that we owned, that the family owned, and they had to pass by the large synagogue, saw it in flames. My father, who had earlier gone to open the store, where there was a large crowd of people smashing the many glass fixtures and display windows. He managed to escape immediate arrest. part of the Crystal Night program was to arrest all men between age 16 and 60 and send them to concentration camps. Next day we go back to school. Principal tells us no more Jews allowed. My friend Leo and I go home. A forced vacation for a 12-year-old is not the end of the world. But that evening, a man in civilian clothes rings the doorbell. We lived in an apartment building. I open the door. He identifies himself as a member of the Gestapo, the secret police. And within minutes, my father was arrested and had to go with him. Next morning, my mother and I tried to find out where my father was sent. No answer. Eventually, we find out that he was sent off to Dachau, the famous concentration camp, which became quite famous when it was liberated by the Americans in 1945. Well, the question was for all the Jews that were still in Germany, where to go, where could one go? And then all of a sudden, this was during the month of November, we hear that some European countries will take children. England said they would take 10,000. France, Belgium, and Holland took a few, and Switzerland too. And my father was in concentration camp. My mother puts me on the list for whatever country where there's a list available. But a couple of days later, we get a letter from a distant relative who is a teacher at a Jewish boarding school for German Jewish kids in the south of Sweden, and saying that Sweden was going to take 500 children. That school was supposed to take 30 or 40 of those 500, and that she had put my name on that list. 2 days later, we get a letter from the Swedish embassy in Stockholm, in Berlin, that they had a permit for me to go to Sweden. That automatically eliminated me from any other country. So my destination under the Kindertransport program was Sweden. How to get there? There was no organized transportation like they had for the many children that went to England. And through an executive who was an honorary Swedish consul in Wiesbaden, we asked what should one do? My father, in the meantime, after 4 weeks, had come back from Dachau. He was in good physical condition and had somehow managed to cope with the dismal treatment and conditions that he had to endure during those 4 weeks. Anyhow, this official that we asked, how does one go to Sweden? He said, just get on a train and go, get out. It was good advice. I still visited with my father, relatives on the countryside to say goodbye. I remember Christmas Eve, 1938. It was, the relatives lived in a beautiful little village. I remember the conditions. I had spent many happy vacations there, but now the families were sitting down and wondering what to do next. Their stores destroyed, their livelihoods no longer able to pursue. And it was an atmosphere of despair and sadness. And I could only wait to get out. A few days later, on the 9th of January, I bid my family goodbye. A few nice words, hoping for an early reunion. I leave Wiesbaden. I'm now 13 years old. I'm on a train to Berlin, where a cousin meets me. Next day, we go to the Swedish embassy. I get my visa. And a few days later, I'm on a train from Berlin through northern Germany to the Baltic Sea, where the train goes on a ferry and crosses over to the south coast of Sweden. The last moment of harassment was when a Gestapo official in black uniform comes to my compartment as the train travels through northern Germany, inspects my little suitcase. Most of my other luggage had been sent ahead. There was a book, a last minute gift. He says, no books allowed. I couldn't care less as long as I get out. Finally, the train gets to Sassnitz, the port in northern Germany, from where the ferry goes to Sweden. The train rolls on the ferry. I remember it was kind of a foggy January afternoon, the 15th of January, 1939. The ferry starts moving. I see the German coast slowly disappearing. I have a tremendous sense of relief. I'm no longer within the borders of Germany, where it was a crime to be Jewish. I get to Sweden. I get met by my relative in a small town called Eslöv. I spent the next year and a half at this refugee boarding school. I make new friends that became my family. 2 years later, I get transferred to another children's home. I can start going to Swedish school until age 16. I go to work, at that time in Stockholm, at the Jewish community. I go to work there and I go to continue my education at night. And I'm in contact with my family in Wiesbaden. In those days, we communicated only by letters. And the postal service between Germany and Sweden functioned very well even during the war. Yes, during the beginning of the war, my letters were censored. And if there was anything written that was not to the liking of the Nazi authorities, they would blacken it out and cancel it out. And this continued until the summer of 1942. We learned that deportations have started. And eventually my parents write to me that they have to leave Wiesbaden. They may go to Theresienstadt, and I should try to get into contact with them. They may not be able to write, but maybe I can find out about them through the Red Cross. Well, I write to them, postcards, registered mail with return receipt, and within days I get their signatures, so I know they're in Theresienstadt. We can correspond, they get my letters. They are allowed to write very brief letters I think once a month, 6 lines. Until January, they had been in Theresienstadt for 5 months. Then my letters come back with a notation abgereist, which meant that they had left Theresienstadt. I know that was bad news. And eventually I found out that the transport from Theresienstadt went to Auschwitz, where they were murdered upon arrival. My grandmother, who was left behind, died a year later in Theresienstadt of malnutrition and starvation and mistreatment. And it was a good thing because eventually she was scheduled also to go to Auschwitz. That's in summary is my story. I lived in Sweden. It was a wonderful experience. But in 1948, my future wife and I decided we wanted to go to the United States. Europe in the post-war years was not, it had limited opportunities. And also the political situation with the Soviet Union encroaching on Eastern Europe. I didn't want to have go through another war in Europe. We came to Los Angeles. We started typical immigrants' lives. We lived here since 1948. It has been a good life. My son lives in Buffalo, but I think he's listening to me right now. And when I look back, all I can say is I've been lucky. I have been lucky that my parents were willing to let their children go, not knowing if they would ever see them again. I was lucky that I got to Sweden and not like my best friend to Holland, from where he was also sent to Auschwitz and murdered there. I was lucky that Hitler lost the war and thereby assured my survival. I was lucky that I had good genes, was able to make a life again. And the only regrets is that so many of my childhood friends and so many other children in the millions were not as fortunate that I was. I think my time is up. I thank you for listening.
Sadly, we could listen to you all day. Thank you, Paul. That was enlightening. And what you see, you know, it so often is this, it was the strength of the parents who had the courage to send their children away so they would have an opportunity to be given a life. Thank you so much for that, Paul. It was so enlightening. And I do want to tell all the listeners before I introduce Barbara that Paul is going to be celebrating his 95th birthday. We just learned just before we went live that Paul in a few days will be celebrating his 95th. So, but on behalf of all of us, a happy birthday to you, Paul. It is now my pleasure to introduce Barbara Winton. Barbara is the daughter of renowned rescuer Sir Nicholas Winton. Amongst her many accomplishments, she is the author of If It's Not Possible, The Life of Sir Nicholas Winton. Barbara, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Michele. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about my father's history and involvement with the Kindertransport. And then Michele has asked me to talk a bit about how that relates to today. And the reason I'm going to do that partly is that my father, when the story became public after 1988, 50 years after the event, he was obviously asked many, many times about the story. And he would grumble quite a lot after the initial interest, because he felt that talking about history didn't really have any impact on today. And he was really much more concerned with the present. He was always concerned with present issues. So I'm going to talk about how I feel his story has impacted on today and the value of that. So in 1938, my father was 29. He had been working in banking and had gone to the stock exchange. So he had a very interesting and busy life. He had come from a German Jewish family background. Both his parents' families were German Jewish, and his mother had come over from Nuremberg, in fact, in 1905. He was born in 1909. So he was 29 in 1938, but he already understood fairly clearly from his own family what was happening in Germany to Jewish people. His aunt had fled. She was a doctor in Berlin, I think, and she had fled to England in 1933 with her family. So he was aware of the issues that were happening, particularly to Jews in Germany. But in 1938, he was working, and he was expecting to go on holiday with a friend of his who was a teacher at a school. And he got a phone call before Christmas from that friend who said, I'm afraid the holiday is off. I'm in Prague, and I think you should come here instead and see what I'm doing. And because he was very involved in politics, and particularly in what was going on in Europe, he understood what had happened in Czechoslovakia after the Munich Agreement at the end of September, and how this had given the borderlands, the Sudetenland of the Czechoslovakia, to Hitler, because it had such a high ethnic German population. The French, the British, and the Italians had signed the Munich Agreement with Hitler, giving him the Sudetenland in return for no further territorial ambitions. And that had led to a huge influx of refugees from that part of the world into the center of Czechoslovakia. So my father changed his plans, and New Year's Eve, 1938-39, he was in Prague, and he met his friend Martin Blake, who introduced him to the woman who was running the Prague end of the British Committee for Refugees from Czechoslovakia. And she was another volunteer. All these people were volunteers who had gone out to do what they could, seeing this crisis building. And her name was Doreen Warrener, and her role was to try and help the people on Hitler's wanted list who had fled from the Sudetenland escape out of Czechoslovakia through Poland to safety, because he had a huge list of people he wanted to arrest. And though at that point, the Germans hadn't invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia, their agents were already in the capital trying to pick up these wanted adults. So my father was shown around. He went out to refugee camps that had set up all around Prague, and he could immediately see the traumatic, chaotic conditions that all these refugees were living under. They were in Nissen huts, they were in tents, they were in old uninhabited castles, all trying to keep warm and to keep fed through a Central European winter. And he was very disturbed by what he saw. Not only that, he saw families, parents coming up to him and saying, you know, you're from England, can you help do something for my children? The parents had already worked out that they weren't going to be able to leave, but they hoped that maybe someone would take their child. And so he had a conversation with Doreen about all this, and she very much encouraged him to get involved. And his feeling was that there were many organizations out there helping the adults, trying to give people a certain amount of security, food, lodgings, and Doreen's organization trying to get out these particularly these wanted adults, but he felt that nobody was really focusing on the children, and he offered and was encouraged to see what he could do about that. He was told that it was unlikely the British government would allow in unaccompanied children from Czechoslovakia. There was already, as Paul has already mentioned, a huge Kindertransport operation already underway by January 1939, which was allowing in children from Austria and Germany. But the British government had not accepted Czechoslovakia as part of that scheme. So he spent 3 weeks in Prague. He had already built up a list of children whose parents had come to him, knowing that he was trying to do something. And while he was there, he met a schoolmaster called Trevor Chadwick from Britain, who had come over to take 2 boys back to his school. They were going to be sponsored. And Trevor said to my father, if you can get the government to agree to your scheme, you'll need someone in Prague and I'll come back and do that. So he went back to England and he went to the Home Office, having been asked by the British Committee not to go independently because they felt that eventually the organisation, the Central British Fund, the Movement for the Care of Children from Germany, as they were known then, would eventually take Czechoslovakia under their wing. And his feeling was that there is no time, we can't wait. And so, being a bolshy person that he was, he went anyway to the Home Office and said, you know, I am a representative of this organisation, the children's section, and I would like your permission to bring in children from Czechoslovakia. And the Home Office said, sure, these are the conditions that the other group have to meet, and these are the conditions you need to meet. You need to provide a foster family for each child, and you need to produce a £50 guarantee. I guess that's about $3,500. £2,500 in today's money. So a not insignificant sum, which was to be put aside for the child's eventual repatriation. So my father discovered that it wasn't impossible, but it was difficult. And he told Trevor that, you know, the project was on, and Trevor went back to Prague and started making further lists and sending information to my father that he needed to try and get families. And he started writing to newspapers, magazines, asking for people to come forward. And gradually over time, with the help of other people who were volunteering, they came forward. I think at this point we need our first picture, probably, if that's all right. So this is a picture that people will recognize very much. This is of my father in Prague at the airport with a group of children who were leaving through another means. This wasn't something that my father organized, but he was part of the logistics on the day. And so he happened to be there and was photographed with this boy, Hansi Beck, who came in January. And so he was then underway with this project. And we look back at the Kindertransport to Britain, and we think, you know, this was an enterprise that everybody was very much in favour of. Unlike today, when we have a refugee crisis and we know that there are many people, the media is not so keen on it. We think that in 1939, everybody was very much for the project as it was then. And I think it's very important for us to recognise that that wasn't necessarily the case. If you could show the next picture, that will demonstrate that, like today, the two articles at the top are from 1939 and very similar to the two at the bottom, which are much more recent. There were people in the media, there were people writing to the papers saying, you know, we don't want any more Jews in our country, thank you very much. And so I think it's important that while we celebrate that the government accepted children then and that people took them into their homes, we recognise that there were the same negative pressures in 1939 that there were today, and that people stood up and said, you know, we are not going to let this put us off. And there were many people who came forward and volunteered to help. And there were many people who accepted children into their homes and made great sacrifices to help. So I think when we look at today, we can see the similarities. And I think it's important that we recognize that, you know, we can't always expect somebody else to do this. We have to do it ourselves. So I think one of the things that we can learn from this is that in every generation, there are challenges, there are crises, there are problems to be solved. My father's view was that I'm not going to wait for someone else to do this. I'm here, I'm engaged, I'm going to take responsibility. And then next picture, please. So alongside him were many others who were also engaged and decided that they were going to take responsibility. These are a number of the people who were involved at the time: Doreen, Trevor. In Prague, there were many local volunteers. Marie Schmolka was a very big person involved in refugee work there. Bill Barazetti, a refugee himself, who got involved. Beatrice Wellington, who was arrested by the Gestapo for the work she was doing with Doreen. And on being interrogated by the Gestapo in response to being told by them, what you are doing is illegal, she turned around and said to them in a damp cellar in the middle of Prague with all these soldiers around her, said, no, what you are doing is illegal. I mean, what a woman, extraordinary. And then there's my grandmother, who I'm named after, who helped my father with the work in Britain and who took on all the aftercare once war started of the children who needed rehousing for whatever reason. And then the Reverend Rosalind Lee and Eleanor Rathbone, both figures at the time who wrote to the newspapers and made a lot of noise to try and get the story known so that people would come forward. So the idea that these enterprises were done by lone individuals is of course folly. It needed a huge number of people to get involved, to come forward, to say, this is not acceptable. I find this unacceptable. I'm going to play my part. And they came together, and without each individual, the number of children who would have been saved would have been much fewer. So please show the next picture as well. Thank you. So this is a much more recent set of pictures, just to demonstrate that, you know, we are looking back in history at what was done then, but that at this very moment today, there are people who have had that very same impulse. They have been in a situation where they have seen refugees, they have seen children who are stuck in refugee camps in Greece, there are children stuck in France, and they have said, I think this is unacceptable, and I am not going to wait for the authorities to come to their senses. I'm going to do what I can now. And I feel, you know, proud to know that there are people who have been inspired by my father's story and who have heard about his story, and they have gone, I think the lesson from this story is not historical. I think it's relevant to today. And I think my response to that is that I'm going to do something myself. And people have gone from all over Britain and from countries in Europe and gone and done their bit to help. They've collected clothes and collected money and tried to help children who are in peril at this moment. And my feeling is that he would be very proud of that. As I said right at the beginning, his view was that history is dead. You know, there's nothing we can do about the past. It's happened, it's over. All we can do is about what's going on today and try and make the future better. And I think he would be proud to think that people had heard his story and gained from that a sense that they could do something themselves to make a difference today. And he would be delighted to know that there are people out there today who have gained that inspiration and are making a difference. His view was that he always talked about ethics, and he said that people should live an ethical life. They should be bound by the moral codes that all religions had in common. They shouldn't think of the things that are different between the religions, but they should think about what's the same of all religions. And the similar thing about religions is that people treat each other with respect, that they deal in truth, they deal in love, they deal in honor, decency, and they help their fellow humans. And if you could just show the last picture. So the final picture is one that I think very much mirrors this. So there's a picture of my father in 1939. The picture in the middle is of him and Lord Alfred Dubs, who was one of the children who came on the Kindertransport, age 6. And Alf Dubs is an example of someone who has said, I understand what it's like to be a refugee, and I am going to do something for refugees today. And the picture on the right is him with a man called Ishmael, a Syrian refugee, who through the work that Alf Dubs did in the House of Lords, managed to get a change to the immigration bill, which allowed unaccompanied Syrian children, unaccompanied refugee children in Europe into this country. And so through his work, he has helped many children to come to the UK and have the same safety and the same opportunities in life to make a difference and to pay back to their communities that the refugee children from 1939 have done. They went on to have great lives and to contribute to the communities they joined, as today's refugees will go on to do. So I think that paying forward is a wonderful example of what happens when you help people in need and people who are refugees. So that's my view about what happened. Michele wanted me finally to mention the fact that one of the interesting things that is happening at the moment is that there's going to be a feature film made of this, my father's story. And when I was asked about the film, I was asked, you know, in an ideal world, who do you think would be an excellent person to play your father? And I thought, and you know how you have this fantasy about this kind of thing, and I thought of all the people, and could be. And then I thought of one person, and I thought, this person would be ideal. He not only has my father's physique, he has some of my father's energy, the quiet energy which can bound out, but can vary depending on the situation, and that's Anthony Hopkins. And I was so delighted to hear that he accepted the role, and so he will play my father in later life after the story came out, and a younger man called Johnny Flynn, an English actor, is going to play him as a young man. So hopefully in a few years we'll have that to look forward to. So thank you.
Barbara, thank you. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. We're now going to open up the discussion for audience's questions. So the first question, and I have a slew of questions here, so I'm going to slide all the way up to look at them. The first question I have, I think, is for Paul, and that is, go all the way up here, goodness me. Paul, how difficult was the long journey for you to do alone? Is Paul with us? Paul?
I think Paul had some connectivity issues.
Did you have connection issues?
Yeah, we're trying to get him back on.
You're trying to get him back on? Okay, all right. So, okay, with that then, you know, Barbara, you discussed, you know, your father's motto, ethics and compromise, and what this means, and how people can put this to practice in their own lives. Is there anything you can add to that as one of the questions?
Well, when he was trying to get help, when he was trying to get foster families to come forward, he wrote to a lot of magazines and newspapers. And in one of them, he talked about what he considered to be the difference between active goodness and passive goodness. And he said, as far as he was concerned, you know, just sitting at home and being a good person and doing no wrong wasn't really what he had in mind. He felt that to really do something to be a good person, you had to do something active. You had to not just think about it, you had to go and do it. And he was someone who always had a project. He always had things that he wanted to achieve. And he felt that it was important to become engaged. And he didn't really mind what people did. You know, if it was something that was meant something to you, that was what mattered. And he was very active later in charity work in his own community. He worked for MenCap, he worked for homes for the elderly. He worked for the Samaritans for a while. And he very much wanted to do things that would make an active difference to people's lives, not just to kind of pray for them, but to make sure that their lives improved because of what he did. And I think that that's the message he would want me to get across, because as I said, he, you know, when people came in and said, tell me your story, he would kind of roll his eyes and go, why, you know, what's the point? But if people came in and said, you know, hearing your story means that I now do this, he would go, that is wonderful. That's what I like to hear.
And is this how you would share to our current and future generations? Is that the legacy that your father would have liked to have left?
I think so. I think so. I mean, he did talk about compromise. He talked about compromise with our last Prime Minister, and it didn't really work very well for her. But she was very taken with his message. Sadly, I think she paid more lip service than actual service to it, but that's the nature of politics. But yes, I think the thing is, he didn't set out to be popular, and he often wasn't popular. He often made people very angry with him, because they would say, do this, and he would do that, because he felt doing this would get him nowhere. One of the letters he sent back from Prague to his mother said, I'm going to stay as far away as possible from all the general committees working on this in London, because they will only slow down my work. And his feeling was that if you want to get something done, you appoint yourself chairman or secretary, you get a committee around you of people who agree with you, and then you get on and do it. And if you spend too long having meetings where everybody has a say, and then they agree to meet again in 3 months' time to decide whether to take it further, that this wasn't his idea of getting things done at all. His view was you get like-minded people around you, and you get on with it. So yes, being popular wasn't something he was necessarily too worried about. He had a very thick skin and was prepared to upset people. And you know, maybe today that isn't the best way to do it, I don't know, but for him it worked, and it was successful. And you know, we have the hindsight that it was successful and it was necessary. Today we don't have that opportunity. If we make a decision to do something today, we do it not knowing the outcome. But I think that's where the ethics comes into it, that if you feel that what you're doing is the right thing morally, you are doing something which feels right on a moral basis. If it doesn't work out, well, people are going to call you an idiot, or they're going to say you were stupid, but you still have that sense that when you took that decision, it was the right thing to do. And if you're lucky, you have an outcome like my father where it makes a significant difference. If not, at least you've done what you believe to be the right thing at the time. And none of us can know. He couldn't know that what he was doing was right. If Hitler had been run over by a bus and everybody had gone, oh, let's forget all this invasion stuff, all the children would have been sent home, and everybody would have said, well, that was a waste of time. It was only hindsight that tells us that it wasn't a waste of time. And that's how I believe we have to act today.
And I think you have your father's wisdom. I really do. One of the questions I have here is this: I understand Sir Nicholas chose not to talk about his experiences for many years. This is also true of many survivors. Although their experiences were very different, do you believe that your father went through some of the same or parallel emotions as the survivors did?
I think that's quite a difficult question, because my father didn't have a language for discussing his emotions, basically. But he didn't not talk about it. He just didn't talk about it very often. I have you know, a number of people who recall him talking about it. And when he decided to find a home for this scrapbook that he was given at the end of the project, which was really the catalyst for the story becoming known, when he wanted to find a home for that, and it went to Dr. Elizabeth Maxwell and then on to the media, he had decided at that point that it needed to be found, and he was quite willing to talk about it. But I think for him there was a certain amount of trauma because the last train that was organised, which was due to leave on the 1st of September and didn't leave because the Germans closed the borders when they invaded Poland that day, and so many children due to come on that train were not heard of again. So there was an element of trauma there, but also, you know, the day after that, war started, and he went on into war, which was also a huge enormity in people's lives. He was in the Red Cross and then in the RAF. After the war, he worked for the International Refugee Organization. There was a lot going on, and that 9 months of intense work on the Kindertransport became kind of concertinaed into a very large amount of other extraordinary events. And I don't think in many ways that it stood out for him more than those did. It was only really this idea that he had this scrapbook and he thought it might be of historical interest, really, that the story became public at all. And as I say, it wasn't that he didn't talk about it, it was just that he always had something going on that was current, which was his prime concern. And this was very much further back in his mind. And we all knew about it, but again, we didn't really understand what it was until we began to meet those children whose lives this scrapbook was about. We looked at the scrapbook and it was like looking at a history textbook. But when somebody walked in and said, "That's my name on that list, this is a letter from someone I knew," you know, the whole thing changed, obviously. And I think that's what's so important about making personal connections. You know, when you meet a refugee for the first time and they tell you their story, everything changes, because this isn't fiction anymore, it's real. And you know it's real because you're hearing it from the horse's mouth. That's why people like Paul telling their stories is so vital.
Absolutely. And talking of Paul, is Paul with us somewhere by phone? Is he with us by phone, Safina?
Yes.
I'm on
Yes.
phone.
Hello. Oh, we missed you. I'm so glad, or at least we can hear your voice, Paul. So just one question, Paul, and then I'm going to read out a slew of names here. And that is, how did your experience impact your life, and how did it impact your life then and today?
What? You mean?
How did your experiences of your journey to Sweden, to Sweden and ultimately to the US, how did your experiences impact your life then and your life today?
It's my life. Then talking about when I went to Sweden, it was a complete change from not having a home anymore. But I felt comfortable in new surroundings. I liked my life in Sweden. They were good years, the 10 years I spent there. That the world events around me, during the war, impacted me, no question about it. I mean, the fact that I lost parents and family, it left a void. But looking at it today, I managed to, again, I made the effort to get back to build up a new existence a new life, a new family. I'm happy to have a son, a daughter-in-law, two lovely granddaughters. I have a vast circle of friends. Many, of course, are no longer alive, but my contemporaries, I miss many, but I have many younger people, that relatives or friends that are my family now. It's my life here was very satisfying. Had a successful professional career, and looking back today, I'm, as I said before, I'm lucky that things turned out well. I am happy for the life I had. I miss my wife. I miss many that I was close to during those 70-some years I've lived here in Los Angeles. But I'm glad I made the decision to come here. As I said before, I have no regrets other than the events that took place in my early childhood that were beyond my control. But I'm happy to say that I managed to live a new life and contribute to the life of many others.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for Paul, and thank you for being with us by phone. I'm sorry you've had so many technical difficulties. With the short time left, I would like to get to some of our messages and read out some names. The first name is Carol Kravitz. Her aunt and her sister were on the Kindertransport. Anita Gross is with us today. Helen Berensen, excuse me, is a daughter of a Kindertransport. Her father, Helen Berentz. There's an anonymous attendee, Dini Begage. Father was born in Vienna and was on the Kindertransport. Joanne Marks, Katz, Kinder. Her mother, Ruth Sommer, and Aunt Sophie Sommer were on the Kindertransport. Ralph Samuels with us. Hi, Ralph. She was on the Kindertransport and came to England. Aura Gordon, daughter of Alexander Gordon. Her father traveled in December 1938, so he was on one of the first Kindertransports from Hamburg to England. Ernest Simon is with us. Ernest, it's lovely that you're with us. I remember you fondly and dearly, and you are certainly in my book. I'm thrilled you're with us. And you came to England in January 1939 from Vienna. Bernard Grimberg is with us. His mother, Genia or Jenny Frankel, was rescued by the Kindertransport from Prague, which means she's likely to be a Winton child. Celia Wortmann, her mother was Martha Zaidman, was on a Kindertransport from Vienna. Mike Shamish, his mother Elsa, née Kaplas, is attending. He's attending from the UK. Hi and welcome, and thank you for joining us. She was a Kindertransport surviving, arriving in England in 1939, and I hope you're managing to follow. I see you're having some difficulty, but I hope you're still following and with us. Another second generation with us is David Ehrman, son of Kurt Ehrman, who left Cologne to Harwich and ultimately moved to Melbourne in Australia. And then there's Lani Wolf, Mike Wolf, a Kindertransport, was on a Kindertransport from Berlin who went to Scotland and lives in Santa Barbara. And you write that you frequently talk at school groups, and we would love to speak to you about talking at the museum. Deborah Lemaitre, her father was Asher Kaufman, 13 years old when he was transported to Israel, Kibbutz Ramat Yohan from Czech. And you write that you're making a documentary about him. That's wonderful. Would love to hear about that. Linda Wartrope, a K2, a second generation. Her mother was Doris Goldschmidt Mason from Schluchtern in Germany. Roger Licht, his mother was on a Kindertransport to England. Thankfully, I certainly agree with that. Robert Klein is with us. He is the son of Kurt Klein from Vienna. He never mentioned the Kindertransport by name. I certainly understand that as well. And his story mirrors that of many of our Kinder. I'm thrilled that Melissa Hacker is with us. Her mother was Ruth Bernholtz from Vienna. And when I hear and see Melissa's name, she, just so you know, she is the president of the Kindertransport Association. So for all the K2s here today and the K3s, I know she would love to hear from you. If you're not members of the KTA, please contact her. I know she would love you to be part of the family. And Daniel Kester, oh, Daniel, Paul's son. Daniel, hi, so thrilled you're with us. And you have some special father. And again, we, wish you Mazel Tov for his birthday coming up in the next few days. He is certainly one of our very special community people. Anita, again, Anita's father, Hannes Gross, came from Brno through Prague, and he must be a Winton child. And Barbara is certainly nodding yes to that.
My father met many of the children who came in later life, and Hanush was one that he got to know very well. I mean, he became quite close friends with many of the children. I mean, he would see them often. They made a huge part of his social life, especially after my mother died in 1999. These now in their 60s and 70s children would come and visit and take him out, and he went and stayed with Hanush and Kirsten in Florida. And he knew Kinder from all over the world and was very close to many of them. So it was a huge addition to his life. They considered him, who had lost their own fathers, an honorary father, and he was very happy to be considered that. And we considered them our kind of adoptive brothers and sisters. So, we've made a very big extended family, and it was a great joy to him in later life to have that connection.
But don't they say your extended family has reached about 6,000 now?
Yeah, it's huge.
Yes. Yes, it's one of the largest families I've ever known. So to continue, Rachel Rubin Green, who's actually one of our docents at the museum, her mother was Anne Fochheimer, a kin from Coburg in Germany, and Rachel also, as does Melissa, does tremendous work for the Kindertransport Association, and thank you, Rachel, for being with us. Judith Stratton, her mother Ruth Deutsch came on a Kindertransport from Vienna. Gisela Weinbaum from Vienna, her daughter Susan Birnbaum is with us today. Susan Cole, her mother Kate Lesser came to England from Berlin. My brother Melvin Berwald is with us, and our mother came from Leipzig in Germany. And Karen Goodman, it's lovely to see your name on here, Karen. I think she's also, I think your mother was also a Winton child. And I remember, Karen, if you're still with us listening, I remember seeing your mother's name on the list, on the famous Winton list. So we're thrilled that you're with us today. We truly are. And I think I have Liz Robinson Kruger, who recently made Aliyah. She moved from the US to Modi'in in Israel. Her mother was Sonia Rubanovich. And she actually asked a question here to say, one of the transports that Nicholas Winton helped organize, are there any photos in the scrapbook that have youth leaders in the scrapbook?
I don't think so. I mean, I've been given one document since I've been doing research for my book, which was of an adult who got who had a document to come as an accompanying adult, but that's the only thing I've seen. I don't think there's anything in the scrapbook.
Okay.
But if you're in Israel, you can go to Yad Vashem and look at the original scrapbook there. That's where it's housed, and you're allowed to go and ask to see it and look through the documentation.
Oh, I didn't realize it was housed in Yad Vashem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tamara Meyer. Tamara is the daughter of Ursula Meyer, née Totschek, who was a kinder from Berlin. Suzanne Eigenstein, I hope I pronounced it right. I don't think I did. Forgive me if I didn't. Her mother, Vera Née Cohn, she was 14 years old in June of 1939. And her sister was Ellen, who was then 9 years old. And she left by boat from Hamburg to the UK. And you're writing this from Israel, so welcome and thank you for being with us. We really appreciate it and thrilled that you are with us. And I think that concludes the list of people. We haven't got through all the questions, Barbara or Paul. I apologize for that, but I think we're running out of time. And Barbara, it's late for you. You're in the UK, but we cannot thank you enough for participating in this special event commemorating World Kindertransport Day. You inspire us all. You inspire us today, and you inspire us every day as we remember our loved ones and we honor their legacies. So thank you so much. Before we sign off, I do want to mention that part of the visionary plan to rescue children was formulated by the Central British Fund for German Jewry, which was established in 1933. And today it is known as World Jewish Relief. And for the listeners with us, you may be aware that World Jewish Relief holds the individual case files for every child who came on the Kindertransport from Germany and Austria. If you would like to request your family records, please contact them directly at worldjewishrelief.org/archives. Once again, that's worldjewishrelief.org/archives. And finally, I want to invite everyone to join us tomorrow, Wednesday, December 2nd at 11 a.m. Pacific time for our monthly Building Bridges program, where you'll be joining several of California's most respected community leaders as they analyze voting patterns on complex issues and discuss ways to work together towards a common goal. And then the following day on Thursday, December 3rd at 11 a.m. Pacific time, please join us for a talk by Holocaust survivor Lou Fogelman. And you can find more information about all our virtual events on our website at holocaustmuseumla.org. So with that, I say, and we all say again, a huge thank you to you, Barbara, and to you, Paul. Paul, I'm sorry you've had these technical difficulties. Again, we wish you a happy, happy birthday. Barbara, it's always an honor and a privilege. There are no words to describe it, really.
It's a pleasure. And if anybody feels they really want their question answered, just go to our website, nicholaswinton.com, you can contact me through that and send me your question and I'll reply by email.
Thank you, Barbara. And everyone, take care, stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope we see you soon. And with that, we all say goodbye. Thank you all so much.